Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, everything I read in July. So before I start, you may be able to hear I have a bit of a cold at the moment, so apologies for that. Hopefully it won't spoil your enjoyment of the video too much. So today I'm going to talk through all the books I read in July. You might remember that July was a month that I gave over to my viewers to pick my TBR. So I asked people to suggest books for me to read. They didn't have to be good books. They could be books that people have really disliked, although I think most people suggested books that they liked. So I had well over 100 suggestions, and I used a randomizer to whittle that down to 20 books, and those are the 20 books that I read in July, along with a couple of other things. So I also had a book that I read for my book group, and also a book I read for my buddy reading with my dad project, and then there's also one book which I read at the end of the month, which at the start of the month I didn't realise I needed to read, so I'll tell you about that one when we get to the end of the list. So what I'm going to do, as I normally do in these monthly wrap-up videos, is go through the books in the order that I read them, and then at the end I'll tell you my favourite book of the month. What I'm going to do that's slightly different this month is I'm going to give you a favourite fiction book and a favourite non-fiction book, because I read a lot more non-fiction than I normally do this month, and I always find it a bit difficult to kind of assess fiction and non-fiction against each other because they're trying to do very different things. Conscious as well that normally during the month I will have done a number of weekly wrap-up updates as we've gone through the month to let you know how I'm getting on and how much I'm enjoying the books I'm reading. Obviously I had a bit of a time out from BookTube in July, so I didn't do that. I think I only did one weekly wrap-up in July, so probably a bit more of a surprise maybe in terms of my my assessment of some of these books, because I haven't really spoken about them on the channel. Before I go any further then, a big thank you to everyone who suggested a book for me to read in July, whether I ended up reading them or not. I will probably pick some more books from that list in the future to read, so if you didn't get chosen in July, keep watching, because I may read one of your books or one of your suggestions later on in the year. Right, let's crack on then. I've got my laptop here as well so I can remember who suggested each of the books. So the first one, the first book I read was this one, A Nightmare Legacy by Jane Corby. So Mark Hodder had suggested that I read a gothic romance, and I chose this one. Mark also read a gothic romance. I don't think he particularly enjoyed his one. I didn't massively enjoy this, but it was quite entertaining. So this came out in the 70s, I think, 1970. Part of the wave of kind of gothic romances that were really popular back then, and it was very, very cheesy and kind of what I expected. So a young beautiful heiress going to a mansion that she's inherited in her, I think it's her uncle's will. There's a bit of a kind of contest for the will, so some people who are vaguely were related to his dead wife are also making a claim for the property. There's a handsome writer and a handsome artist there as well, and the artist is someone she previously had a relationship with that scandalised the town. So there was a bit of romance, there was a bit of mystery, there was a kind of threats to her life and things like that. It was very, very silly, but I did quite enjoy it. The writing was truly terrible at times, but it was still a fun read. After that then, I read Keeper of the Children by William H. Hallahan. This was suggested by Gail Jahn, so thank you for the suggestion, Gail. This was an entertaining kind of paperbacks from hell style horror novel. This one came out, I think, in the early 80s, 1978, so late 70s. This is about a guy who's like a kind of Buddhist monk type character in America who's running this cult where he recruits local teenagers to go out begging, basically, to raise money. And he's claiming it's to go back to the Far East to fund schools and things like that out there for disadvantaged children, but it's actually just for him. And it's about the parents of a couple of the children trying to find out what's happened to them, trying to get them back from this cult. but the horror element, so there's kind of a thriller spine to the story, if you like. But the horror element comes in because there's all this weird stuff that happens in the book where inanimate objects like dolls and teddy bears and things like that get possessed. And also cats. There's a certain amount of possession of cats in the book as well, as you can, as the cover might suggest. So those scenes, the scenes of horror where, like, you know, weird stuff happens involving dolls and things like that, were really, really good. Really, you know, like over the top and quite cheesy, but very, very entertaining. The actual like central plot of the book wasn't so good. Did feel very 70s. So it was kind of a mixed bag, this one, but I definitely had fun with the horror elements of it. After that then, the first of the non-fiction books that I read, this was suggested by Richard Gill. So this is Once a Saint, an actor's memoir by Ian Ogilvy. Ian Ogilvy, a British actor who was in many, many different things. And the reason the book is called Once a Saint is he was in a reboot of The Saint, a TV show, and I think the late 70s, early 80s, which was really quite successful. But he was in a load of different movies as well, and also a stage actor. And subsequently has become a writer. So one of the things he covers in this book is that he ended up suffering with crippling stage fright. And gave up acting as a result of that. So that section of the book was really interesting. The other section I found particularly interesting was him talking about his the work he did with Michael Reeves, the horror director. So he was in all three of Michael Reeves's films. Michael Reeves most famously directed Witchfinder General. So that was really, really interesting, hearing him talk about those movies. And the book just generally just had a nice kind of cosy feel to it. Some nice humour, and just enjoyable watching someone talk about their life. And, you know, someone with a reasonably notable life, talking about all the famous people they met and stuff like that. So fairly standard stuff, really, I guess, for an actor's memoir. But it was entertaining, and definitely, if you're a fan of Michael Reeves's films, it's definitely worth checking out for what Ian Ogilvy has to say about their friendship and the films they made together. Right, next up was the pick for the CriminOlly book club this month. So I run a book club for my patrons and channel members, and they pick the book each month. So I kind of open it up for people to suggest books, and then they vote on the book we're going to read. So the book we read in July was one I'd read before, but I really enjoyed rereading it. It's Psycho by Robert Bloch. So best known clearly for the movie, but that movie was based on a book. And the book is a really interesting companion to the film. And I think a lot of the people who read it agreed with me on that it gives you a slightly different insight into Norman Bates's character. A lot of the detail, a lot of actually what happens in the book is the same as in the movie, but you get to see into Norman's mind. And that is really interesting. It's right, really suspenseful and tense at times. The famous shower scene is very different in the book. It's a lot less graphic in the book, but still really, really shocking. So yeah, if you're a fan of Psycho the movie and you haven't read the book, I definitely recommend it. Next up then, we have The Betrayal of Thomas True by A.J. West, which was suggested by Mark Ford. This was great. So this is a historical novel. It's kind of a mystery, but I would more just class it as historical fiction than a mystery, but it has a strong mystery element. So it's about this young guy who travels to London. I'm going to have to remind myself when it was, 1715. So he lives in the country. He travels to London to become an apprentice, and he's gay, and he falls in with this kind of gay underworld in London. And it was really fascinatingly described, really rich and colourful, really interesting to meet all these different characters and to see the prejudice that they are up against. There's like a religious group that's kind of going around London trying to like literally eradicate them, trying to get them hanged. And Thomas kind of falls into all of that. So it was like quite humorous at times, really suspenseful at times, had a nice romance in it as well. It was a really, really excellent book. I enjoyed it very much indeed. Not the kind of thing I would necessarily normally read. I'm not really a big fan of historical fiction, but I really thought this was great. And it definitely achieved that aim of like giving you a sense of a different time as well as telling you a good story. So I definitely recommend this one as well. Next up then, some more non-fiction. This one was suggested by Bobby Hall. So this is The Killer of Little Shepherds by Douglas Starr. This was really fascinating. So a book about a French serial killer and a pioneer of kind of like forensics who was like trying to stop him. So you've got the lives of these two men kind of like interspersed with each other as the book progresses. It was really, really interesting. So that detail of the kind of thinking of, I'm trying to remember the name of the guy, and I can't even find it in the blurb. Lacasagna is the doctor, and Vacher is the serial killer. So you get to see into both of their minds. But particularly fascinating was the way that Lacasagna kind of thought about the science of proving guilt and things like that, and his presence in court cases and that kind of thing. There's a load of photographs in the book as well, which were really, really interesting. It was very, very well done. I really enjoyed that a lot. Next up then, something very different. So Acrobat by Gonzalo Lira, which was suggested by Seth Ball. So this is an espionage and like entertaining, slightly cheesy espionage thriller. With an interesting ending. The ending was not what I expected at all. It's worth reflecting on the fact, as a number of people have pointed out in the comments, and neither Seth nor I realised this when Seth suggested the book and I started reading it. Gonzalo Lira is a somewhat troubling character. So he's dead now, but so he's Chilean. Was a big part of like the manosphere and had a YouTube channel where he posted, I think, some fairly unpleasant videos, but ended up being like an apologist for Russian aggression, and was arrested by the Ukrainians because of that, and actually ended up dying in jail in Ukraine. So definitely an interesting character, but had written this kind of fairly silly but entertaining espionage novel a few years, I think, before all of that. So this is about a kind of elite team within the CIA who are called Acrobat, who become are like disavowed by the CIA and are on the run, and they are kind of fairly broadly drawn. They're almost like a bit of a superhero team. They've all got different like capabilities and things like that. So it was very fast paced. The action scenes in the book were very, very well done. The plot was a little bit silly at times, and the characters weren't always great. But it was entertaining enough, and certainly the action sequences were great. And there was a twist at the end, which I thought was really interesting. I definitely wasn't expecting it. I'm not sure I liked the way it wrapped up the book, but it was definitely an interesting and surprising ending to the book. Next up then we have Waywood by Emilia Hart, which was suggested by Jim from the channel Jim's Books, Reading and Stuff. This was very good. So I listened to this on audio. This is a book about 3 different women living at different times in England, with kind of witchcraft as the thing that ties them together, as well as family ties. So they're all related to each other. So you get a woman like long in the past who's being tried as a witch. You get another woman around the time of, I'm questioning now whether it was the First World War or the Second World War. I think it was the Second World War. So a young woman who lives with her father and brother in a kind of mansion, and it's about her, in particular, her relationship with her father and with a cousin of hers who comes to visit, who's been away fighting in the war. And then you get a woman in the present day who's fleeing from her abusive husband. So you've got all of that, but there's this, as I say, family bonds that tie them together, and these 3 stories are kind of interspersed with each other. But there's also this element of witchcraft, this kind of witchy power that the 3 women have. It was just a really interesting, entertaining, gripping read. The way the 3 stories are kind of woven together was done really well. Sometimes I feel like that can be a bit overdone in books, but in this one I thought it was well handled, and it definitely adds tension as a result of that. So I enjoyed all 3 of the stories, but the way they kind of come together in the book was very, very well done. Okay, next up we have the Jane Austen Society by Natalie Jenner, which was suggested by Sherry Rabinowitz. So this, it's fair to say, is not the kind of book I normally read. So this is kind of a cosy book set around the end of the Second World War, about a group of people who come together through their love of Jane Austen. So I'm not a Jane Austen fan. It was appropriate I read this in July because there's an annual reading event, Jane Austen July. I did try to read a Jane Austen book a couple of years ago in Jane Austen July. I tried to read Pride and Prejudice and didn't get on with it at all. So the fact that there are lots of references to the works of Jane Austen in this book, as you'd expect, was something that was, kind of didn't really work for me, I guess. Those references were lost on me. But it is a kind of cute and cosy book. It has a nice feel to it. You get a nice range of different characters. So that, for example, there's like a movie star. You've got people who live in the countryside around where Jane Austen lived. And they come together as her kind of library, really around her library, which is part of the estate. So one of her descendants having died, and there being discussions about what's going to happen with the estate. And they try to kind of keep her library together. So it was definitely kind of sweet and cosy, but I didn't love it, if I'm honest. It's just really not the kind of book that I particularly enjoy, although the characters were nicely done in it. Next up then, some non-fiction. So this one's suggested by Heidi, one of my viewers. So this is Salt, A World History by Mark Kurlansky. This was really, really interesting. So as the title suggests, this is a book about salt and about the history of salt and the impact of salt on kind of society and the world economy and things like that. And it really goes into it. It's like a 450-page book. So it really deep dives into that detail, which on the face of it might sound like it's a bit overdone. It might sound that like 450 pages is too much just to talk about salt. But the book was really, really fascinating. Very, very interesting. And in particular, the way Mark Kurlansky talks about like the impact of cooking and things like that on culture was very, very interesting. And industry and things like that as well. So talking about, the use of salt as a preservative. I was amazed by how much I liked this book. It really was quite a gripping read. I was expecting to read a couple of chapters and then put it aside for a bit and then pick it up again. But I ended up just sitting down and reading it. It was very, very entertainingly done, nicely written and just full of really fascinating detail. Okay, next up some more fiction. Warrior by Zoe Archer, which was suggested by Veronica Price. This was fun, but it didn't quite work for me overall. So this starts out like a kind of historical romantic adventure type story. So it starts with this guy, so it's set in Victorian times, and this guy who's been fighting for the British Empire kind of around the world comes back to England to kind of settle down and live a normal life, which he doesn't really want to do. So he really prefers a life of adventure. But luckily for him, just as he's getting off the boat at the docks, he sees a guy who's being waylaid by some scoundrels, and he intervenes to try and save this guy's life. He doesn't manage to do that, but with his dying breath, the guy who's been attacked gives him like a mission to go on, basically, and he ends up travelling around the world looking into kind of this secret society. So there's kind of elements end up being kind of elements of magic to it and kind of conspiracy and things like that. So it's got kind of a bit of an urban fantasy feel. And you've also got a really strong romantic element. So he meets this woman on his adventures and they fall in love. There was a ton of spice in this book. It was very, very sexy at times. I'm not a huge fan of reading sex in books, I have to say. I tend to kind of skip those bits. But I don't really see the point of it, if I'm honest. But there was a ton of spice in this book. So if you like that, you'll probably enjoy it. It's the first in the series. I think there's 4 in the series. And I really, really enjoyed the opening and the kind of historical adventure parts of it. The central character's quite fun and the central female character's fun as well. But yeah, overall, it ended up leading too much into the kind of urban fantasy side of things. And I don't love that style of fiction. So I didn't love it overall, but definitely had some good moments. After that then, I read The Glamour by Christopher Priest, which was suggested by David White. Christopher Priest is an author I've been meaning to read for a while, and I'm so glad I have now. I'm definitely going to read more by him because this was phenomenally good. So he was a British science fiction writer, and this is a book that at first doesn't feel like science fiction, but it's got a central concept to it, which I can't tell you because it would ruin the book. It's got a central concept to it, which is definitely science fiction. it was just great. So it starts with this guy, the central character, who's been really badly injured, and he's in hospital recovering from his physical injuries, but he's also lost his memory. And this young woman comes to the hospital claiming to be his girlfriend. He doesn't remember her at all. So it's really about him trying to piece together his memories, trying to understand what his life was, and also trying to understand if he really knows this woman or not. But what you've got going on in the background is this weird central concept, which gradually comes to the fore as the book progresses. And the book was just really intricately plotted in terms of giving hints of what's going on, but you only really get the full picture as you get to the end. It was absolutely brilliantly done. I'm really quite in awe of Christopher Priest. It was fantastic. I have to say there's a rape scene in the book which was really, really horrific, really disturbing, really difficult to read, but in the right way, if that makes sense. I didn't feel like it was exploitative, but just wanted to given that I'm praising the book so much, I wanted to make people aware of that, because if that's the trigger for you probably don't want to read the book. But yeah, I really did think it was excellent. Right, moving on then, to something I didn't like quite as much, I'm afraid. This was very different, very cosy. So this was Garden Spells by Sarah Addison Allen, which was suggested by Pamela Ratajczak. So this was a book that's really all about its vibe. So it's set in North Carolina. It's about these sisters. There's kind of magical elements to it. That in particular kind of food magic, so them cooking things and growing things in their garden, which the local people come to realise have special properties. There's some interesting, there's an element of kind of tension to the book in that one of the women is fleeing an abusive relationship. But really it's about that kind of cosy small town vibe with a bit of magic. If you like that kind of thing, I think you'd really love this book. And certainly in the comments, a few people, when I said I was going to be reading it, said that they really liked it, but it's just not really my kind of thing. So yeah, I didn't love it, I'm afraid, but it was an interesting enough read, and yeah, the vibe was nice and the characters were well done too, but yeah, not necessarily my kind of thing really. But the whole purpose of this month was to read things that aren't really my kind of thing. So glad that I read it. Next up then, suggested by Dutch Greybeard, we have a much loved book, which I'm afraid, again, I didn't particularly love. So that is The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I think I'm pronouncing that reasonably correctly. So this is a kind of magical children's book, but a book that's loved by adults as well, I think, about this guy who's a pilot who crashes in the desert, and he meets this Little Prince character who comes from another world. And the book really is about the Little Prince describing to the pilot how things work on his world. So there's quite a lot of kind of interesting and nicely done kind of humour and observation in this book about the way the world works. It's got a wonderful kind of magical feeling to it. Some nice illustrations done by the author as well. Some really nice concepts in the book. But it didn't really grab me. It didn't really work for me. And maybe I just wasn't really in the mood for that kind of slightly whimsical, magical style of book. But yeah, it was... I can see why people like it so much. I can see why people adore it as a book, but it didn't really work for me. Next up then, something very different indeed. So this was suggested by Zivilin. This is Paprika by Yasutaku Tsusui, who is a Japanese author who I hadn't read before, but I think has been really prolific in Japan, and some of his books have been translated into English as well. This is also, I believe, turned into an anime movie. So this has a really, really interesting concept at its centre. So it's about a machine that can see, record people's dreams and can also put people into other people's dreams. So a really interesting central concept. And Paprika, who's the central character, is a woman who uses that ability, so uses the ability to go into other people's dreams to kind of work as a therapist. So she goes in to help people interpret their dreams and to help them overcome, things that they're trying to get through in their lives. So really a great central concept, some really interesting dream sequences in this book as well, and it's got that kind of weird thing that books like this sometimes have, where you don't really know if something is real or if it's a dream, which was effectively done in the book. So there's a lot that is good about this book. But there's also just, I felt like a vein of kind of misogyny running through the book. The female characters in this book are not well treated at all. Paprika isn't well treated at all by the author. Some horrible things happen to her without a real purpose that I could see, really. So it felt like very much a book of two halves. There were parts of this book that I really, really loved, but parts of the book that I didn't like very much at all, unfortunately. But definitely a very interesting read. Okay, next up then, something very different, but with a fantastic cover. So this is Nothing But Velvet by Cat Martin, which was suggested by Stephen Newtons. So this is as you can probably tell from the cover, a romantic novel in the kind of bodice ripper vein. So it's about a young woman, and I have to say the beginning of this book, the first quarter or so of this book, I really loved. I was really, really enjoying it. So it's about a young woman who's engaged to be married to an awful man, but she has to do it for the sake of her family. It's that kind of a vibe. But before she can get married, she gets kidnapped by the man's brother, who is has been like cast out from society. He's been in prison, and he's trying to get revenge on his brother. But he pretends to be, because he's been in Australia and he's come back to England, so he pretends to be this notorious highwayman who's called One-Eyed Jack, I think, or something like that. So he kidnaps this woman for as part of a convoluted plot, basically, to get back at his brother. So the first quarter of the book is the woman constantly trying to, and she's like a really nice kind of plucky heroine, trying to escape from him, and him constantly foiling her. So quite kind of cheesy and dated, but really like entertainingly done. There was a lot of humour in the way it was done, and you've also got this kind of smouldering enemies to lovers romance kind of building up as the story progresses. But then after that, when it becomes clear to the characters, kind of both of those characters, what's going on, and things kind of go back to normal, if you like, I didn't enjoy it as much. That opening really, really hooked me, but after that it becomes more of a traditional kind of romance style novel. And whilst there's a lot of intrigue, there's a lot of betrayal, revenge, and all that kind of stuff, and like the Zoe Archer book, a ton of sex in this book as well. It didn't for me live up to the promise of the beginning. Okay, next up then, some more non-fiction. This is a book I've had for ages and had never got around to reading, but I'm glad I finally did. So it was The Butchering Art by Lindsay FitzHarris, which was suggested by some other character. So this, like Children of Little Shepherds, is a book really about like the history of science and like medical science. So it's about a guy called Lister, who Listerine, the antiseptic, is named after. And he was the person who kind of really championed and discovered the importance of antiseptics and like fighting infection and things like that during surgery. So prior to that, like a huge percentage of the people who had surgery died as a result of infections post-surgery or even got during the surgery. And in fact, a lot of doctors died of infections they got because they accidentally like nicked themselves when they were doing surgery. So Lister really championed, did a lot of research into what could be used as antiseptics and championed the importance of it, and was like poo-pooed by a lot of the medical establishment at the time, but kept on fighting his cause, and clearly eventually had a really transformative effect on medicine and surgery in particular. This book, it's just filled with really, really horrific detail. So at the beginning of the book in particular, they talk about kind of the stage surgery was at kind of even before then, which was before they had anaesthetics, and talks about surgeons who would basically just try and do the surgery as quickly as possible because the patient would be screaming their head off on the operating table. And it's really, really horrible. And some of the details of the kind of infections people get are really, really horrible as well. So that detail was disgusting but kind of grimly fascinating, and it was very interesting hearing about Lister's life and how he came to be involved in medicine, and the inspirations, the people who inspired him. I didn't feel like it had a stronger kind of narrative running through it as the Children of Little Shepherds did. It didn't tell its story in quite as satisfying a way, but it was still very, very interesting, and as I say, glad that I finally gotten to read it. Next up then, something very different, and a novel that I really, really loved. So this was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, which was suggested by Elio. So this is a retelling of the story of Achilles. And I found it really, really enjoyable as a book, but I've also found it fascinating kind of as a concept, because Madeline Miller, this was her first novel, and to choose to do something like this feels like really, really quite bold. And she does it brilliantly. But this is it's not like a modern retelling of the story of Achilles. It's just a new telling of the story of Achilles. And it was, so it doesn't, it doesn't feel like it's trying to reinvent Achilles or anything like that, really. It's just a really, really good version of that story and of, the story of the Trojan War. It was just beautifully, beautifully done. So it's narrated by a young man called Patroclus, who ends up becoming a lover of Achilles, and there's a lovely romance at the heart of the book that really runs throughout the book and was really beautifully done. So you've got that. You've also got like tons of action. There's a bit of humour. There's big battle scenes. It was just brilliantly done, and the way she weaves in kind of the gods and things like that into the story, I thought was really convincing. It's all portrayed as just, this is just what the world is, and it doesn't kind of hold your hand at all. You kind of just have to keep reading and go with it until you understand some of the concepts and things like that. But just completely entertaining as a novel. It felt like it had everything you could want in a book, and I'm really, really enjoying it a lot. Okay, next up then, another novel I really, really enjoyed a lot, which, like The Song of Achilles, feels like it's kind of got everything. It felt like a complete meal of a book, and that was Trusty from the Tool Room by Neville Shute, which I read for the project where I'm buddy reading with my dad his 12 favourite books. So this is set in, I think it was written in 1960, so it feels like it's kind of set in the 1950s, but it was only published posthumously after Neville Shute had died. And it was just great. So it's about a guy living in England who's really kind of unassuming, lives a really quiet, simple life. He's married, but he doesn't have any children. And for his job, he works writing articles and like designs and things like that for a model making magazine. So he creates models that other people can make. He lives, as I say, very, very simply. And his wife's sister, is married to a guy who's quite wealthy, and they've decided they're going to emigrate to Canada. And they are the husband is a naval guy, so they're going to sail there. They've got a yacht, and they're going to sail across to Canada. And while they're doing that, they leave their daughter with their central character and his wife to look after, and then they're going to get the daughter over there once they've settled in Canada. And their boat sinks and they die. And on the boat is basically the daughter's inheritance. And this central character, this quiet guy, decides that he is going to travel across the world to get to the shipwreck and to get her inheritance back. So it becomes a kind of adventure story with an unlikely hero. And it was just fantastic. It was really, really entertaining. There was some lovely humour in the book. But it was like genuinely gripping at times, and you really care about this guy. You really want him to succeed. And as he goes on his travels, I don't want to give too much away, but as he goes on his travels, he discovers that whereas he thought he was just, doing this simple job and just enjoyed writing these articles, that he's actually had an impact on the lives of people around the world. So it was just fantastic. He was a great central character, and it was a really, really very enjoyable book. Okay, next up then, a book by an author I've been meaning to read for ages. So this was suggested by Glenn Husser, and this was Come With Me by Ronald Malfi. So Ronald Malfi, I've got, I think, 3 of his books. He's one of those horror authors I've had loads of people praise, but I've never actually read anything by. And this was really, really great. So this is a story about a guy whose wife dies very suddenly. She's killed in a mass shooting. And dies completely randomly as well, it must be said. And after she dies, the husband discovers there are things about her life that he didn't know about. He's worried that she might have been having an affair, and he also discovers these notebooks she's been keeping about various young women who've disappeared. and that she's been like investigating these disappearances and deaths of some of them. And he decides he's going to investigate his wife's life to try and find out what was going on. He just can't reconcile his memory of his wife with this new person that he's kind of discovered, and also to end up investigating the disappearances and deaths of these women. It was really great. I expected it to have more of a supernatural element than it did, but it ends up being just a really, really solid thriller. Really gripping. Really enjoyed reading about the central character, and there's a lot of emotion in the book because of his bereavement, but it was also just a fantastically well plotted and interesting, thrilling mystery. So yeah, enjoyed that very much indeed. After that, then something very different. So this one was suggested by William from the channel William's Library. So this is The Shake by Maggie Davis. This was interesting and entertaining to read because of its kind of 70s-ness, but I didn't love it, I'm afraid. So this is about a guy who is so he's like a prince in this like fictional Arab country where oil has been discovered, and the royal family are very wealthy as a result of that oil. And he's got like kind of grand plans on what he wants to do with the family and their wealth. And he goes to the States, he goes to America to kind of enjoy himself over there, but also to make some business deals and things like that. So it's kind of about his voyage to America and what happens to him there. And it had a nice kind of 70s blockbuster type vibe to it. But equally, it wasn't well enough written to be really, really gripping and entertaining. And it wasn't badly enough written to be really entertaining because it was badly done. It was kind of right in the middle. So it was kind of quite, I finished it. It kept me reading, but it didn't really have anything that wowed me about it in either a good way or a bad way. So yeah, an interesting read. Maggie Davis, it turns out, wrote quite a few different books across different genres. So I think she tried her hands at loads of different styles of book and never really like cracked the big time, unfortunately for her. But yeah, interesting always to discover kind of old books like this that are very much of their time, and just to see what they were like. Right, just 2 books to go then. So next we have, suggested by Matt Wiley, we have A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. So this is a really interesting novella. Somebody in the comments, I think it was Greg from the channel Another Bibliophile Reads, said that I should read the story The Library of Babel by Borgia first, which I did. And A Short Stay in Hell definitely takes inspiration from that story. So the short story is about this library which is infinite, which contains every book that's ever been written or could ever be written. What Stephen L. Peck does with that concept is turn that library into hell. So the idea is, and this is like not the Christian hell, it's kind of more like, and he amusingly points out it's not the Christian hell. There's a very funny conversation between like the kind of central demon and the central character in the book about how the fact that Christianity had got it wrong. There's another religion which got it right, but Christianity and all the other major religions got it completely wrong. So anyway, this hell is kind of more like purgatory in that you go there, but you don't stay there forever. But the twist is, in order to get out of hell, you have to discover the book in this infinite library that is about your life. So there is a book in there that tells your story, and you have to find it in order to escape. And it's about the central character and other characters he meets there trying to do that. And it's one of those books that while I was reading it, I was thinking this is a really interesting concept, and it's kind of quite entertainingly done. But it's after I finished the book that it really had an impact on me. So Stephen L. Peck is like a philosophy professor, and it definitely feels like a kind of a book about existential philosophy. It was very, very interesting, and it's definitely kind of stuck with me since I finished reading it. So yeah, very glad to have read that. And then the final book I read this month then was the book I didn't realise I needed to read at the start of the month, which was Birding by Rose Ruane. So the reason I need to read this is my local bookshop, local independent bookshop, Chapter 34, which I've talked about on the channel before, has got a new thing they're doing, a breakfast book club, where you go along and they give you breakfast and coffee and things like that, and you discuss with the other people there, you discuss a book. And I decided that sounded like a really fun, interesting thing to do, and I really like supporting that bookshop as well. So I've signed up for the first one. and it takes place in the middle of August, and the book that we needed to read for it was Burning. And I decided I wanted to get this out of the way before Garb August, so I read it on the last day of July. It was a quick read, it's not very long, I did read it in a day, and it was great. I really, really enjoyed it. It's not the kind of book I normally would have picked up, like, you know, a lot of the other books this month, but I enjoyed it very much indeed. So it's about two women living in this kind of rundown English seaside town. One of them is someone who, so they're both in their kind of early to mid 40s. One of them is someone who was a pop star in the 90s, so she was part of a kind of two girl group, who were like briefly very, very successful and then had a kind of big fall from success. So she has subsequently had a fairly normal life, but has been in an abusive relationship. She's kind of trying to get away from that. So she goes from London to go and stay with the other girl from that girl group, the other woman from that girl group, to like spend a bit of time with her. So she's one of the characters. The other character, who's also a woman in her 40s, is this woman who lives with her mother, who's an elderly woman, who is very, very strange, the mother. She insists that they do the same things all the time, they dress alike and things like that. So you've got these two very different women, both living in this small town. And the book is really about their lives and about how their lives intersect. And it's obvious from the beginning of the book that their lives are going to intersect, because you know they are geographically close to each other. But I thought the way that Rose Rain had their lives intersect was really excellent. She didn't take like the easy route. She does it in a really, really interesting way. So I particularly enjoyed that element of kind of the plotting of the book. But it's also just a book that has a fantastic vibe to it. So there's a lot of emotion in the book. It's very sad at times, very moving at times, very kind of angering at times. There's quite a bit of humour in the book as well. But it's really this kind of slightly dreary, rainy English vibe that it's got that I enjoyed particularly. It's just got this kind of slightly shabby rundown feel to everything, which I thought was really fantastically well done. And it's a vibe I do enjoy in books. So I enjoyed this very much indeed. Right, we've got to the end of the video. Now I need to tell you my two favourite books. So I'm going to choose, as I said at the start, I'm going to choose my favourite fiction book and my favourite non-fiction book. The favourite fiction book is relatively easy. I enjoyed all of the favourite non-fiction book is relatively easy. I enjoyed all the non-fiction I read this month, but the one that has really stuck with me was Salt by Mark Kurlansky. Just such a fascinating concept for a book, and so well done, and I never would have expected a book about salt to be as fascinating as this one was, so really enjoyed that. The fiction book is more difficult because I enjoyed many of the books I read this month. There were certainly a number of books that I gave, you know, kind of a high 4 or 5 stars to. I think the book, though, that I'm going to pick was the Glamour by Christopher Priest. It was just fantastic, and it's really a book that has stuck with me. Just the central concept is so well teased out as the book progresses. It really felt so brilliantly conceived and put together. I really, really admire it as a novel. So yeah, that is my favourite fiction book of the month. So I will leave it there. It's been a long video. You may not realise this, but my camera actually stopped recording halfway through. I'd filled up the memory card, so I've had to film the second half of this video twice. So hopefully that didn't feel too disrupted. So yes, anyway, thank you very much if you are someone who suggested a book for me to read this month. And as I said at the start, I will try and get to some of the other books that were suggested that I didn't get to at some point during the course of the rest of the year. So yeah, thank you very much if you suggested a book. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you had a good reading month in July. Hope you read some good stuff. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I talked about. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.